Nothing less.
Mark Mitchell.
On the question being now put.
I call Chris Farfoy.
It's a pleasure to take a call on part two. I want to concentrate on two key phrases. Nice of you to arrive, actually, Jerry. I'd like to look at clause 10 and two key phrases, and the Leader of the Opposition has just pointed one of them out to me. The first one is to avoid doubt, and the second, which is in brackets, is and have never applied. And because those two phrases exist in clause 10, I believe there is some serious justification for this piece of legislation, A, to be squared away and separated into its own legislation, but also that it deserves the scrutiny of a select committee. Because to have a phrase to avoid doubt in clause 10 suggests that there was some doubt. And then we have to make the assumption that this government has in clause 10, which inserts new sections 2 and 3 to section 15 of the Housing Act, actually takes care of that doubt. Now, we don't believe that has taken care of all of the doubt, and because of the phrase and have never applied, I believe that there might be some New Zealanders out there who may have been affected by this piece of legislation that might have something to say about that. And that's why I question, along with the Leader of the Opposition, as to why this piece of legislation is being rammed through under urgency. Because I do want to quote and respond to something that John O'Naylor, who's, I think, been the only National MP who's been brave enough to get on his feet and try and defend this piece of legislation under Part 2, because he, and I quote, said, this is not a significant change. And we should always be worried when a National MP stands up in this House and claims that this is not a significant change. Because something else must be going on when only one of their MPs can stand up in this House and put his head above the trench and try and defend the changes that they're making here. Mr Chair, can I also point to some of the discussion that was had before this started around point of orders and the lack of a regulatory impact statement. And I think that's important because people at home and those in the gallery listening may have thought that was just a bit of procedural nonsense that no one cared about. But the fact that this government hasn't bothered to get its officials to look at this piece of legislation and say what impact does this have to the average New Zealander speaks volumes about A, their lack of any plan around this piece, around their housing strategy, and an arrogance that they haven't even bothered to ask the officials to look at it. And Mr Chair, I think that the fact that we haven't got their regulatory impact statement shows that either they're trying to rush this through because there's something else afoot, and that would probably lend to the fact that we're not seeing this under a select committee process. And I think it also feeds into a well-embedded narrative that Nick Smith and this government have absolutely no clue when it comes to solving the housing crisis. Because what have we had as a plan? Either it's some half-assed hold on. I take that back. I'm sorry, I apologise. Some quarter-assed plan that a minister might announce before budget day, which doesn't work, which, when looked at its effectiveness, 15 people were helped. And that plan was to move people out of Auckland and say, here's $3,000, go to another part of the country. I believe it was around a dozen people were helped. So I'm sorry, Mr Chair, if the government took offence to my statement that it was half-assed, because that was overstating the effectiveness of that measure. It was overstating the effectiveness of that measure. Mr Chair, Mr Chair, this piece of legislation should have gone through a select committee process. And I do look back to clause 10 and the first three words, to avoid doubt. There was some doubt. This piece of legislation doesn't clarify that doubt. And also the other phrase, and have never applied, suggests that there's some retrospective action happening here that New Zealanders should have been allowed to have a say on.
Alistair Scott.